When you hear Pete Hegseth say what he said in Singapore, and of course what Trump said about trade war with China, what is your reaction?
Thank you very much for having me. Yes, the United States has launched the largest scale tariff war or the trade war, not only against China, but against the rest of the world. Some Americans call the trade war as the economic nuclear war. So I tend to agree that this war should be stopped as quickly as possible by all of the world as well as by the courts in the United States. As far as the Secretary of Defense, Mr. Hegseth, I would say he will not be able to fight against the megatrend of China's reunification with Taiwan. And the United States will never really decide to shed the blood of their soldiers and officers to defend the so-called separatism of Taiwan, because they will be involving in a civil war, which was now finished in 1949. And if the separatists in Taiwan want to push the edge of the envelope, it will cause the resurrection of the unfinished civil war. And between China and the United States, I don't think we are destined for war. I believe in the inevitability of peace between China and the United States. No one should agitate for war between China and the United States, because that will be mutual destruction and Armageddon for mankind.
But do you think that a trade war, which it looks as if China and the US are either having or might have, is the precursor to what could become a military conflict? Are those two issues linked?
Well, if we look back into history, on many occasions, trade war eventually lead to war. And I think the task for our generation to make sure that the trade war will be stopped peacefully, and the trade war, if continued, will not lead to a hot war, because a war between China and the United States will lead to mutual destruction and Armageddon for mankind. Nobody should want to be involved in the Armageddon of mankind. We should all work hard for peace. Let's embrace peace and let's bring the trade war, which is a wrong war for the United States to fight, to an end as peacefully as possible.
But it's also a bad war for China to fight because of the domestic economic situation in China itself. You've gone from a housing bubble, which burst, perilously, to a factory bubble, which requires you to sell the stuff that you make to your trading partners around the world, including, of course, the United States. So to what extent do you feel vulnerable by the trade war that has been raised by the United States?
First of all, China does not want to fight a trade war or a tariff with anyone, especially with the United States. However, if you look at the situation, the United States initiated the trade war. They imposed the trade war on China and the rest of the world. And the only thing China needs to do, which is the right thing, is to step up and defend free trade. And defending free trade is not just for the sake of China, it's for the sake of mankind. Now, comparing with any other country in the world, China is in the best condition right now. The piercing of the property bubble was initiated by the Chinese government. And after several years of restructuring, I think we've put the property bubble behind us. And China is highly organized right now, very much disciplined, and China can go forward with or without the United States.
Sorry to interrupt, Victor.
With the United States, we are much better position.
Right. What I've been reading, Victor, is that actually, far from being organized, the Chinese leadership is panicking because the domestic economic situation requires you to sell your stuff abroad. And if you can't sell it abroad, you're going to have real problems at home because you cannot replicate your foreign markets with a domestic market where, Chinese citizens are just not prepared to pay the same amount of money or to spend any money on the stuff that Americans are buying, for instance.
I completely disagree with the proposition of your question, with due respect. I think ever since 2017, China has been readjusting its exports, and by now, China's export to the United States only account for about 13% of total Chinese export to the rest of the world. And China is now the largest trading nation with more than 140 countries in the world. Therefore, if you allow me to say one point, I think philosophically, we don't care if we are forced to lose out the US market. Why? Because we value freedom, we value free trade more than economic losses. I think the Chinese nation as a whole, being very much united, will be able to sustain whatever losses there are if we are shut out of the US market. But the quid pro quo is that the US will be shut out of the Chinese market. So President Trump and the US government need to ponder the real consequence of having China-US trade, bilateral trade, two-way trade, grinding to a halt. What will be the consequence for the American consumers? I think they will be panicking. There is no panicking in China at all.
Okay. Victor, stay on the line, please. I want to bring in Sam Lowe. Sam, when you hear what Victor Gao has been saying, when you hear about the rhetoric and, and the fact of these steel tariffs just announced by Donald Trump, how worried are you that this will actually, turn into a much more serious trade war than the one we've seen so far? Or is it a case of taco, as they like to say on Wall Street, Trump always chickens out?
So I'm not fully bought into this so-called taco hypothesis, because the premise is that Trump makes these big announcements and then he, as you say, chickens out and rolls it back in the following days. And this is true to an extent insofar as we saw, for example, the imposition of the Liberation Day reciprocal tariffs, which were very, very high. And then for many countries, and then a few days later, he rolled it back and said, we're actually just going to do 10% for everyone for now. But my point is that he still did the 10% for everyone. On cars, he's still done a 25% tariff on everyone. On steel, he's already done a 25% tariff on everyone. He's now threatening 50%. He's doing an investigation into pharmaceuticals, which could lead to a 25% tariff there. He's doing an investigation into semiconductors, more tariffs there. So while he does often chicken out, so to speak, from his biggest threats, he actually has reset the bar in a way. He sort of shifted the Overton window in terms of what we think is normal. And the average tariff rate of the US is going up and up and up. By the end of the presidency, I expect it to be on average around 15 to 20 percentage points higher than it was at the beginning. And I think that matters. And I think focusing on the idea he always chickens out misses the fact that he often does actually follow through.
Maybe this is Wall Street
threats.
Maybe this is Wall Street, hopeful, wishful thinking. How damaging has this chaos of tariffs been so far to the American economy and to the world economy? I mean, one day, he announces 50%, and I don't know, maybe 100%, then suddenly there's a reprieve. Is it 90 days? Is it 120 days? I mean, does anyone actually know where they stand at the moment? It's utterly confusing. And who's damaged more by this?
So it's created a huge amount of uncertainty for companies insofar as you can't necessarily invest on any given basis because you don't know what the economic parameters will be on a day-to-day basis. I mean, to give an example of this, when he announced the film tariffs, I'm not sure if you remembered this, we haven't actually seen...
Oh yes, that was only last week, wasn't it?
yeah. So these haven't come into effect yet. But when he announced them, and this all of a sudden meant that people signing contracts all over the world to, say, film in a given country or hire studio space outside of the US paused. Because all of a sudden they think, well, our product somehow might get tariffs. So even though he didn't necessarily follow through from it, the uncertainty still has a cost. In terms of the impact on the US and the world, I'm still not sure we've fully seen this yet. And it will be multifaceted insofar as tariffs in the US could lead to inflation in the US. It could actually lead to deflation everywhere else. Going back to your previous conversation, as we see Chinese goods that otherwise would have entered the US being diverted elsewhere into other markets, which could push down prices in those markets and could lead to them imposing their own tariffs on China, which is, I suppose, this escalatory spiral that many people fear.
Victor Gao said earlier, and I'll get back to him in a minute, that China has an amazing capacity for pain and, and for dealing with the economic consequences of a trade war, a greater capacity than America. Do you think that's accurate?
Well, maybe we'll find out. It does appear to me as if both the US and China viewed the Trump 145% tariffs and the Chinese response, which was slightly less, but still over 100%, as being too much. That was a pain point that was too much for both economies, which led to the negotiation that happened a couple of weeks ago and the reduction of the tariffs, which Trump has now threatened to reimpose. So I think there is a point at which it's too painful for both. I would assume that we're going to settle around a 30 to 40% tariff in both directions. And we should remember,
which is a hell of a lot, by the way.
Tariffs already.
That's a lot, isn't it? 30, 40%.
Yeah. I mean, there was already 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles going to the US. This has been going on for a while. So in a sense, this is an escalation of an existing trend. It's not the creation of it.
Okay, finally to you, Victor. Taco, Trump always chickens out. Yes or no?
Well, I would give President Trump all the respect he deserves as the president of the United States. However, I think President Trump is very mischievous. His art of war really is the art of inflicting as much pain on everyone around him in the United States and outside of the United States. And President Trump has become the greatest unreliability, unpredictability, and a lack of reliability in the world of today. So we need to deal with him as he is, rather than blow him out of proportion. He is the greatest source of lack of reliability in the world of today.
Okay. And China may be a lot more reliable, but many people are also very unhappy with the way that China has conducted its trade, the way China is conducting military policy at the moment. So you're predictable but scary.
Well, I think China is the major force for peace, and China is the standard bearer of free trade. The world should be proud of that.
You don't believe that, do you, Victor?
I do believe that.
I mean, you're great at producing stuff, but you've been cheating left, right, and centre.
I want to be the bearer of the flag of the free trade for the sake of mankind, as well as for Britain.
Okay, just one more on Taiwan. I mean, the language used by Pete Hegseth was kind of frothy, but essentially he didn't even go as far as Biden did in terms of, destroying America's strategic ambiguity over Taiwan. Do you think that at the end of the day, America might persuade itself that intervening militarily in Taiwan is the right thing to do?
Well, we, the Chinese, always look at this starting from the philosophical point. Now, philosophically, it is against the fundamental interests of the American people to be involved in the so-called Taiwan separatist movement. It's absolutely against the United States government. The United States, if involved in supporting separatist movement in Taiwan, will be illegitimate in whatever they do. They will throw out the diplomatic relations between China and the United States out of the window. Therefore, they need to really ponder the consequence of what if they shut themselves out of the People's Republic of China and they become a force for Taiwanese separatists, and they bring death to hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of American soldiers and officers for the sake of what?
Yeah.
For the sake of supporting separatist movement in Taiwan?
There's also the question of what the Taiwanese people themselves want. But we'll leave that for another day, Victor. Got to leave it there. Victor Gao in Beijing. Thank you very much. Sam Low in London. Thanks to both of you for joining us.